I work at a small library in my hometown. It's a tiny place in a quiet town where nothing much happens, except maybe a big high school sports win that gets everyone excited. I'm the librarian, but I also teach a class at the local community center about folk tales, old stories that have been passed down for ages, about strange things people say they've seen. One night, after class, I was driving home. It was really dark, and I was going slow because I could barely see ahead of me. I like driving on the back roads because they're peaceful. It helps me relax after a long day. There's this part of the road where trees line both sides, making it feel like you're driving through a tunnel made of branches. It's a little eerie, but in a calm way. As I was driving, I noticed something in the distance. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. There was something standing near the edge of the trees, right where the road starts. It was tall, shaped like a person, but it didn't look right. At first glance, it looked like someone wearing a big coat, but the closer I got, the more I realized it wasn't clothes. It was covered in fur or maybe feathers. I thought maybe it was an animal, but then it turned and looked straight at me. Its eyes reflected the light from my car, glowing like bright reflectors. I felt frozen, unsure whether to drive away or stay. I just stared at it, trying to figure out what it was. It was too big to be anything I was familiar with. It didn't feel like an animal from this place. It didn't move right away. It just stood there, like it was watching me too. After a while, it finally started to move, but it didn't walk like a person. It sort of glided, like it wasn't used to walking at all. It disappeared into the woods on the other side of the road. Normally, I wouldn't follow something like that. I like my routines, and I prefer things to make sense. But this was different. I couldn't let it go. Even though I knew better, I turned off my car, grabbed my flashlight, and stepped into the woods. My heart wasn't racing, but I felt alert. Whatever it was, it didn't seem like it wanted to hurt me, but I was curious. I moved carefully, trying to be quiet. The branches snagged at my clothes, and the ground was uneven. My flashlight cast strange shadows that made the woods seem even more mysterious. I kept walking, looking for any sign of the creature. After a while, I started to think I'd lost my way. Everything looked the same, and I wasn't sure how far I had gone. Then I heard a faint whistling sound. I followed the noise, pushing through the last bit of trees, and found myself in a small clearing. The moon was shining bright, lighting up the entire area, so I turned off my flashlight. And then, there it was. Now that I could see it clearly, it looked even coals. It had large wings folded behind it, and its eyes were glowing a deep red, like burning embers. It didn't move. It just stood there, as if it was waiting for me. For a moment, I felt like I was part of something rare. It wasn't fear I felt, but a kind of wonder. It was like seeing something you never thought could exist. The creature tilted its head slightly, like it was acknowledging me. I took a step forward, but it spread its wings wide. They were huge, much bigger than I had imagined. We stood there watching each other. Then, without a sound, it rose into the air. It didn't flap its wings like a bird. It seemed to lift off smoothly, almost like it was floating on the wind. I watched it disappear into the sky, feeling like I had just experienced something impossible. I stayed there for a while, just thinking about what I had seen. When I finally made my way back to my car, I sat there, not sure what to think. I hadn't taken any pictures or found any proof, but I didn't need to. Would you believe me? Maybe, I thought. There's more to the stories I've been telling all these years. I had heard the stories before. Every hunter around these parts had hogzilla, they called it, a giant wild hog, supposedly a cross between a domestic pig and a wild boar. The rumor had been going around for years, but no one had ever caught a real glimpse of it. Some people said it was over 12 feet long, weighing more than 1,000 pounds. Others claimed it was nothing but a myth, a hoax made up by bored folks who didn't have anything better to do. As for me, I didn't believe it either. I'd been hunting for over 20 years and thought I'd seen it all. Big deer, black bears, wild boars, you name it, but nothing like Hogzilla. I figured it was just a tall tale. That changed one evening. I was out hunting like I usually did on the weekends. The weather was perfect, cool, with a light breeze, and the woods were quiet. I had my rifle slung over my shoulder, moving carefully, as I always did, scanning the woods for any sign of movement. I wasn't really expecting to find much. It was a slow day, and the woods were still. As the sun started to set, I decided to head back. That's when I heard it, a loud grunt. It wasn't like any animal sound I'd heard before. It was almost like a low growl mixed with a snort. The noise came again, louder this time, and it was coming from behind a thick cluster of trees about 50 yards ahead. I couldn't see what it was yet, but I knew it had to be something big. I crept forward, my hand already gripping the rifle. I didn't know what I was expecting, maybe a large wild boar or a bear, but nothing could have prepared me for what I saw next. There it was, Hogzilla. At first, I couldn't believe my eyes. It was massive, bigger than any animal I'd ever seen in these woods. It was 12 feet long, maybe more, and must have weighed over 1,000 pounds, just like the rumors had said. Its body was a strange mix of wild and domestic. Its legs were thick and muscular, its back arched like a wild boar, but its face had that broad, flat snout of a farm pig. Its tusks were curved and sharp, sticking out like daggers from either side of its mouth. I just stood there, frozen, staring at it. My hands went cold, and a wave of goosebumps spread over my skin. I could feel the rifle in my hands, but for the life of me, I couldn't move. The creature snorted and pawed the ground, turning its massive head toward me. Its eyes were small, almost beady, and they seemed to lock onto me in an instant. But it didn't charge. It just stood there, as if it was sizing me up, deciding whether I was a threat or not. I'd been in the woods long enough to know that wild animals could be dangerous, but this was something different. This wasn't just another wild hog. It was like something out of a nightmare, something that didn't belong in the real world. The thought flashed in my mind that I should pull the trigger, but my body refused to listen. I was too dumbfounded, too in awe of what I was seeing. I had hunted all my life, but nothing had ever made me freeze like that. It was like my mind couldn't fully grasp what I was looking at. This creature, Hogzilla, was real. And it was standing right in front of me. I don't know how long I stood there staring, but eventually the creature let out another low grunt. It turned its head away from me and started moving back into the brush, its massive body disappearing into the shadows of the trees. It moved with a surprising amount of grace for something so big, almost like it knew exactly where it was going. When it was gone, I finally snapped out of my trance. I realized my hands were still gripping the rifle, but I hadn't even lifted it. My heart was pounding, and I was breathing hard, as if I'd just run a mile. I couldn't believe it. I'd had a clear shot at the creature everyone thought was just a legend, and I hadn't taken it. I stood there for a long time, listening to the woods, hoping to hear it again, but there was nothing. The forest was quiet, like it had never even been there. I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, disappointment, and a strange sense of awe. I couldn't explain it, but something about seeing that creature had shaken me to my core. When I finally made my way back home, I told a few people about what I'd seen. Most of them didn't believe me. They said I'd probably just seen a big boar, but I knew what I saw. That was no ordinary hog. That was Hogzilla, the real deal. I was walking with my friend, just enjoying the quiet of the world around us. The path we were on was familiar, winding its way through the tall grass near a shallow river. Birds sang softly in the distance, and the only other sounds were our footsteps and voices. We weren't in any rush, just taking in the peacefulness of the day. My friend had his sketchbook tucked under his arm, as he often did. He liked to draw whenever something caught his eye, and I had seen him fill pages with sketches of birds, trees, and whatever else happened to show up on our walks. I didn't think much of it until something strange caught our attention. Across the river, in the distance, there was something moving. At first, it looked like a shadow, just a blur on the edge of the water. But as we stared, it became clear that it was something. The shape was strange. It moved slowly, its body low to the ground, as though it was slinking through the reeds. There was something unsettling about the way it moved, almost like it didn't belong. I glanced at my friend, and his eyes were fixed on the creature. He didn't seem afraid, though. Instead, he was intrigued. He reached for his sketchbook without saying a word, flipping it open to a blank page. My heart was beating faster now, and I couldn't help but feel a growing sense of fear. I tried to tell myself that it was just an animal, maybe a large bird or something, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. Its body was too low, its legs too thick. The creature didn't look like anything I had ever seen before. I wanted to turn around and leave, to get as far away from that thing as possible, but I couldn't move. My legs felt like they were glued to the ground, and I could only stand there, staring. My friend, though, had already begun sketching. His pencil moved quickly, capturing the shape of the creature as it lurked by the water. He was focused, his hand moving steadily across the paper. I couldn't understand how he could be so calm. There was something about the creature that made my stomach twist in knots. It didn't feel right to be watching it, as if we were seeing something that wasn't meant to be seen. The creature was long, with a broad, almost barrel-like body covered in matted fur. Its legs were thick and short, its paws webbed like those of an otter. But what struck me the most were its eyes. Even from the distance, I could see them, large and dark, gleaming in the fading sunlight. They didn't blink, just stared straight ahead, scanning the area as if it was searching for something. Suddenly, it paused. I was sure it had noticed us. It was close enough that I could see the ripples in the water where it had been moving. But it didn't seem to care about us. It turned its head slowly, as though listening for something in the distance, and then it slunk further into the reeds, disappearing from view. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. My legs were still trembling, and I felt cold, despite the warmth of the afternoon. I wanted to ask my friend if he had seen it too, but when I looked over at him, he was still focused on his sketch, his brow furrowed as he added the final details. His drawing was rough, but it captured the creature's shape well enough. The broad body, the thick legs, and the strange webbed paws were all there. But there was something about the eyes that he hadn't quite gotten right. They looked smaller on the page, less intense than they had in real life. I didn't say anything, though. I didn't want to relive the moment any more than I already had. As my friend finished his drawing, I glanced back toward the water, half expecting to see the creature again. But the river was calm, and the reeds were still. Whatever it had been, it was gone now. But I knew that wasn't true. We had seen something we weren't supposed to see. My friend seemed content with his sketch, flipping his book shut and tucking it back under his arm. He didn't look afraid, but I could tell that he was thinking about what we had seen. We didn't speak as we continued walking, and the silence felt heavy between us. I had been walking home from a friend's house in Dover, Massachusetts. I liked the peace of those late hours, with only the faint sound of crickets breaking the silence. That night, though, The walk felt a little different. There was a strange tension in the air, like something was watching. I had taken a shortcut through a stretch of woods near my neighborhood. It wasn't a dense forest, more like a patch of trees between houses where the occasional path cut through. The trees were old and tall, and though I had walked this route many times before, it felt unusually dark under the thick canopy of leaves. As I walked, I glanced up at the sky. The last light of day was fading fast, leaving only the deep blue of twilight. There was a chill in the air that didn't match the season, making me wish I had brought a jacket. I walked faster, trying to shake off the feeling of unease, but it stayed with me. I couldn't quite explain it, but something felt off, like I wasn't alone. I was nearing the edge of the woods when I saw something move out of the corner of my eye. At first I thought it was just a deer or a raccoon, but then I saw it more clearly. It wasn't like anything I had ever seen before, and I stopped in my tracks, staring. There, just ahead of me, perched on a rock, was a small figure. It was crouched down low, but even from a distance, I could tell its head was much too large for its body. Its skin was a pale, rosy tan, almost glowing in the dim light, and it had a strange, smooth texture, like polished stone. The body was thin and spindly, with long limbs that seemed too fragile to support its oversized head. The creature wasn't looking directly at me at first, but I could tell it was aware of my presence. It was hunched over, balancing on all fours, its fingers gripping the edge of the rock tightly. I stood frozen, unable to move, my heart racing. I had heard stories about strange sightings in Dover, stories of the Dover demon. I never gave them much thought, but now, standing there staring at this thing, I knew those stories were real. The creature shifted, lifting its head slowly, and that's when I saw its eyes. They were large and round, taking up most of its face. There were no whites, just two solid orbs of a dull orange glow. It wasn't a sharp, immediate fear, but a deep, primal kind, the kind that roots you to the spot and makes your blood run cold. I couldn't tell if it was curious. All I knew was that I didn't want to get any closer. We just stared at each other. My legs were shaking, but I forced myself to stay still, hoping that if I didn't move, it wouldn't either. Then, without warning, it moved. The Dover demon stood up on its hind legs, its movements fluid but unnatural. It took a few steps toward me, its bony arms swaying by its sides, and for a moment, I thought it might come closer. But then it stopped, as if reconsidering. It tilted its head to the side, those glowing eyes still fixed on me, and I could feel its gaze piercing right through me. Slowly, it lowered itself back onto all fours and turned away. In one quick, graceful motion, it leaped off the rock and scurried into the underbrush, disappearing into the shadows of the trees. I didn't move until I was sure it was gone. My legs felt weak, and my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to run, to get as far away from that place as possible, but another part of me was too scared to move, afraid that if I did, it might come back. Eventually, I managed to start walking again, though I kept glancing over my shoulder the whole way home. When I finally made it back to the safety of my house, I locked the door behind me and sat down, trying to process what had just happened. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the Dover demon's face, those strange glowing eyes staring back at me. I started avoiding that path through the woods. Even during the day, I couldn't bring myself to walk there. I knew it was irrational, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the Dover demon was still out there, somewhere in those trees, watching and waiting. It's been years since that night, but that experience still haunts me. I moved to South America seeking a fresh start. I arrived in a small village by a wide river, surrounded by thick green trees and tall mountains. Life here was different from what I knew in the United States. There were no busy streets or tall buildings. Instead, I found myself in a place where time seemed to stand still. Every morning, I woke up to the sound of the river flowing nearby, and the sun peeked over the mountains. I often watched as people gathered by the riverbank. They fished for their meals and washed their clothes in the clear water. Their laughter mixed with the sound of splashing, creating a lively atmosphere. I felt as if I had stepped into a different world, one that was simpler and closer to nature. I liked to spend my days exploring the area. I wandered through the village, greeted the locals with friendly smiles, and learned about their way of life. They had stories filled with magic and mystery, tales passed down through generations. One story that caught my attention was about a creature known as El Cuero. This creature, they said, lived in the river and was known to be dangerous. It was said to have a long, flat body, like a giant piece of leather, which it used to blend in with the water. At first, I didn't believe the stories. They felt like legends meant to scare children. But as I listened to the villagers, I noticed something in their eyes, a mix of fear and respect. They warned me to be careful when swimming in the river and to always stay close to the shore. One warm afternoon, curiosity got the better of me. I decided to take a walk along the riverbank. The sun warmed my skin as I strolled through the soft grass. I watched as children played by the water, their laughter ringing in the air. Fishermen stood patiently with their nets, waiting for a catch. I felt a sense of peace, but I couldn't shake off the stories about El Cuero. As I walked further, I noticed the river starting to widen. The water flowed faster here, creating small rapids. I found a spot where the trees hung low. It was quiet, with only the sound of the rushing river. I sat on a large rock, taking in the beauty around me. Suddenly, I saw something moving in the water. At first, I thought it was a log floating downstream. But as I looked closer, I realized it was too long and smooth to be a log. It glided silently beneath the surface, leaving only a gentle ripple in its wake. Was this El Cuero? I remembered the tales the villagers told me. They spoke of how the creature could be deceiving, lurking just below the surface, waiting for the right moment to strike. Should I stay and watch, or should I run back to the safety of the village? I decided to remain still, my breath held tight in my chest. The water shimmered under the sun, and the creature began to emerge. It had a dark, leathery body, just as the villagers had described. I couldn't see its face, but its long form undulated gracefully through the water. It was mesmerizing and terrifying at the same time. My mind raced with questions. How long had this creature lived in these waters? Was it truly dangerous? The stories seemed to come alive before my eyes, each one filled with warning and awe. I felt like an intruder in its world, observing something sacred. The creature continued to glide, weaving in and out of the sunlight. I felt a strange connection to it, as if it were both a part of this place and something completely otherworldly. I remembered the villagers saying that El Cuero was a guardian of the river, protecting it from those who would harm it. Perhaps it was simply watching me, curious about this stranger who had come to its home. Minutes passed like hours as I sat, unable to look away. The river was alive with secrets, and El Cuero was one of them. I thought about my life back in the United States, where everything felt rushed and disconnected from nature. Here, I was a witness to something greater than myself, something that had endured long before I arrived. As the sun began to set, the creature started to slip back beneath the surface. I felt a pang of sadness as it disappeared, leaving only small ripples behind. It was as if I had shared a moment with a ghost of the river.